This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
A French minister arrives in Mali to pressure the junta over its links with Russian mercenaries. Tanzania launches a program aimed at fast-tracking vaccination against COVID-19. And the impact of COVID-19 on the Sustainable Development Goals in Africa. We'll tell you more in the hour. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. Uganda enacts its first ever climate-related law to deal with the climate crisis. And in sports, an all-African affair at the finals of the Rugby Sevens Championship in Canada. We start the program in Guinea, where the military junta say they will not yield to pressure by regional leaders to return to constitutional rule. Regional Economic Bloc, ECOWAS, has frozen the financial assets of the junta and their relatives. ECOWAS has also barred them from traveling following the September 5th ouster of President Alpha Conde. Now, earlier we spoke with Wole Ojewale, the Regional Organized Crime Observatory Coordinator for Central Africa at the Institute for Security Studies, about developments in Conakry.
The option for the ECOWAS is very, very clear. And it is to explore every possibility that they can to ensure that democratic transition is embarked upon immediately. And I think the first thing which the president of Nigeria has actually spoken about is the fact that there might be the need to activate the Article 45 protocol of ECOWAS on democratic governance. And that implies that not recognizing the election that brought Alpha Conde in with the legitimacy crisis that triggered it, and conduct and support the democratic institution within the country, working with AU, UN, to ensure that there is prompt election that takes place in the country. And the starting point is probably to put up a transition government in place that is going to spearhead that within the next 6 months. You know that France has been very, very strong in terms of political leaning of Francophone African countries. So it gets everybody worrisome, like you have said. And I think probably France is just trying to read the situation and intervene as appropriate. But I'm very, very optimistic that France is going to support a democratic process within the country. And then I think the ECOWAS should play the lead role here and not really be too concerned about what role France is going to play on the long run, because this is our own continent and this is our own region. And the primary responsibility for democratic restoration and sustenance actually lies with ECOWAS. So I think we should worry less about the position of France in this and just concentrate on how ECOWAS is going to provide the lead. Ouattara has gone there, the president of Ghana has gone there, and I think going by what has happened in Mali and the role that ECOWAS is playing, we're also going to get a positive response from Guinea in this regard.
Well, let's have a look at some international news. We start in Russia, where partial election results show the country's ruling party will retain its majority in parliament. Over 90% of ballots counted. The Central Election Commission said United Russia won nearly 50% of the vote. The party has already claimed victory. The Communist Party, United Russia's nearest rival, won around 21%. United Russia has faced a slump in popularity due to years of failing living standards and allegations of corruption. In Hong Kong, all 1,500 seats have been secured on the election committee that will choose the city's next chief executive. About 5,000 people cast their votes this weekend for committee members. Our reporter, Sen Zhuin, tells us more.
The results are in. All seats up for grabs on Hong Kong's selection committee have been secured after a day at the polls. Vote counting began 3 hours after all ballot boxes arrived at the central counting station in the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center. Officials briefed the media on the delayed counting process.
Relevant station. And in the first stage, they have taken a long time to do that. Nevertheless, at the second stage, when the boxes reached the central counting station, the verification of the ballot papers count have identified several discrepancies, and they have taken much time in reconciling them.
Candidates and members of the public were invited to witness the process.
And I think it may not be fair to pinpoint particular but incomplete situation. So I'll ask you to wait for our election report.
Social welfare is one of the most competitive sectors in Sunday's election, with 23 running for 12 seats. With 5 earning the same votes, a seat had to be determined by a lottery. One of the few independent candidates from Saigon district said he knew he had a lower chance despite he stands governance by patriotism.
I did not have an outstanding campaign in comparison with other candidates, but we have a high return on votes. There's a chance when the other candidates have done a better job on campaigning on social media.
This is the first election held under the city's revamped electoral system. Some of the voters I spoke to earlier say the changes have afforded them a clearer thought process so they can select those who can represent their core interests. Some have doubted whether the representatives elected under governance by patriotism can represent the basic needs of Hong Kong residents. But voters say they are living a safer life now.
After the protests against the extradition law in 2019 and then the pandemic, Hong Kong's economy is at rock bottom. Residents are living in misery. After the enactment of the national security law, those who were messing around in the Legislative Council are no longer there. Now the council is on the right track, so they can really do something for the people in Hong Kong.
I think it's better now. We feel less safer. We're no longer worried about going out at night and run into protests. I think it's good now.
Voters have also shared their thoughts on youth employment and transportation. They say it is impossible to ask the representatives to meet all their needs, but they have confidence in those chosen by the people of Hong Kong. Chen Ziyuan, CGTN, Hong Kong.
France has reportedly called off a defense ministers' meeting with the UK as the fallout continues over a new security pact announced by the US, the UK and Australia. In an attempt to make amends, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said they are very proud of ties with France, and US President Joe Biden has requested a phone call with French President Emmanuel Macron, which is scheduled for the coming days. Britain and the US announced last week they will help Australia deploy nuclear-powered submarines. They scrapped an original order with France. Australia says it informed France of concerns over the order months ago. France accused the 3 countries of duplicity and has recalled ambassadors from Canberra and Washington, but not London. Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian explained why.
With Great Britain, there is no need. We know their permanent opportunism, so there is no need to bring our ambassador to explain it to us. In fact, in this matter, Great Britain is a bit of a fifth wheel.
Coming back to Africa now, Tanzania has launched a program aimed at fast-tracking vaccinations against COVID-19. The program, scheduled to start on Monday, will involve using mobile vaccination vehicles to reach communities in marginalized areas of the country. Now, according to the country's Health Permanent Secretary, Abel Makubi, the newly launched initiative will also involve increasing the number of COVID-19 vaccination centers from about 500 to over 6,000 centers. Tanzania intends to vaccinate about 600,000 people within 2 weeks from the start of the program. Well, let's bring you more on this story now. We go live to Dar es Salaam, where we're joined by CGTN's Daniel Kijo. Daniel, tell us, has the program kicked off? It appears that Daniel Kijo cannot hear us at the moment. We will try and speak to him a little later. Let's move on now to Mali. Mali has the right to seek military support from whoever it wishes. This is being said by the country's prime minister in response to France and other foreign powers expressing alarm at a report that Bamako was approaching Russian mercenaries for assistance. Now, speaking to a Malian news site, Prime Minister Choguel Maïga did not confirm whether the government was in talks with any other party, but diplomatic and security sources say Mali's government was close to a deal with a private Russian military contact. France says such a move would be incompatible with its military presence in Mali as it scales down its counter-terrorism operation in the Sahel region. All right, let's bring you more on this. We're joined by Dixon Osajia, a security consultant in Nigeria, live with us from Lagos. Thank you so much for joining us, Dixon. Now, we know that regional bloc ECOWAS, as well as neighboring countries, have raised concerns about Russia's ties with Mali. Why do you think it's a concern even for these neighboring countries in West Africa?
All right, thank you very much for having me. The situation in Mali is a worrisome situation, and this war began since 2012. And you can see that a lot of lives have been lost in Mali due to various interests and most of these terrorist groups that are hitting so hard on the government. If not for the coup in 2012, I don't think I would have been in this stage. But the reason why we arrived at this stage was because of the 2012 coup that hosted out the then government, based on the fact that the people of Mali are complaining about poverty, maltreatment, and other non-functional government activities. But now, going by the intervention of the Wagner Group from Russia, I think the reason why the African components are taking a departure from that submission or suggestion was because they don't want this situation to escalate. And, the French government also have an interest in Mali, and they've also paid some supreme price in ensuring that Mali return to a state of peace. Bringing in the Wagner Group, I don't think it's a good development, and I also join hands to support every other continent that wants to kick off this suggestions, because Dixon, it's not going to really help or mitigate. It's really going to escalate the situation in Mali. So what the government needs to do is to ensure. Let's take a closer look at
what Paris's interest really is in this particular matter and why they're so concerned about Russia. They're saying that Russian presence in Mali would undermine their counterterrorism operation in West Africa's entire Sahel region. Do you think this is a valid concern?
I think it's a valid concern. Mali is a French-speaking country, and I don't think Russia has really played a role right from the independence of Mali, the country of Mali. For me, if they want to bring in these guys, I don't think it's a good submission as of now. Because one thing about war is that most people think that military might will eliminate terrorism or whatever the case may be, or the state of unrest. In any part of the world, even great nations like America, they've never succeeded in eliminating such kind of threats that bring a country to a state of negativity. But for me, I think what the government needs to be looking at now is to ensure bringing all interest group together, just like what the ECOWAS stands for. The ECOWAS are pushing for unitary form of government to ensure that the country of Mali, resolve this peace internally and ensure that the civilian lives and the lives of everyone in Mali are safe.
Indeed.
If you want to bring in the Wagner Group from Russia, I think it's really going to, prolong this war because military might will never eliminate terrorism. We need negotiation. We need to be. We need more talks from all the aggrieved parties. They need to come to the drawing board
Dixon,
and also ensure
we are
that
running out of time
they
here.
resolve what the problem really is.
Indeed, but we are running out of time here, Dixon.
So
just one quick question. This development is coming as French troops are actually preparing to leave Mali. So if Mali is looking as far as Russia for help, does this suggest that the country itself doesn't have faith in its ability to secure the country, to stabilize the country, and perhaps doesn't have enough faith in ECOWAS either to be able to help stabilize Mali? Well, you see, the junta guys are actually, we are pushing for this
Wagner Group to come in as a machinery. For any military guys to push for that, that tells you that their military applications are weak, their defense mechanisms are weak, and if they must call for any engagement, I would not advise them to call for private contractors. They must look inward within the ECOWAS region and the ECOMOG region to ensure that other contingents from Africa come and beef up the security in Mali to ensure that this war is brought to an end. I would not advise and also support the emergence or the invitation of the Wagner Group. But for Mali, the military defense in Mali is very, very weak. They need more of strength. They need to beef up their mechanism. They need to beef up their technological application and their mechanical application in order to, contend with such kind of threat in the nearest time.
Thank you so much. Dixon Osajia joining us there live with that analysis from Lagos. You are watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. Coming up, a look at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Sustainable Development Goals in Africa. We'll tell you more in just a moment. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. We start in Nigeria now, where kidnappers have released 10 more students who were abducted from a school in Kaduna State in the northwest part of the country. The students had been in captivity for 2 months. Others are yet to regain their freedom. Our correspondent Phil Ihaza has more from Abuja.
The unknown gunmen released the students of Bethel Baptist High School in Damishi, Kaduna State, leaving 21 more in their captivity. The school's administrator, John Hayab, said an undisclosed ransom was paid to release 8 students, while another 2 were set free due to ill health. In July, the gunmen invaded the school and abducted 121 students, but many of them have been released in batches since then. Kidnapping for ransom has increased in Nigeria, with more than 1,000 students kidnapped since December. As a result, the United Nations Children's Agency UNICEF says at least 1 million students in Nigeria could miss school this year. President Buhari has banned all state governments from paying any ransom to kidnappers and directed security chiefs to find and arrest the perpetrators. Dozens of kidnappers have been killed and many others arrested by security agents in Kaduna, Niger, Zamfara and other affected states in the region after a massive crackdown that began about 2 weeks ago. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Algerians are in mourning for a 3rd day following the death of former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Flags are being flown at half-mast in honor of Bouteflika's role in the 7-year war for independence from France. Bouteflika, who had been ill since suffering a stroke in 2013, died on Friday, aged 84. His 20-year rule that was riddled with corruption ended in disgrace. He was pushed from power following huge street protests when he sought a 5th term in office. Bouteflika's public appearances became rare in the final years of his presidency. He had not been seen publicly since President Abdelmadjid Tebboune took office in late 2019. According to the former president's lawyer, Bouteflika will be laid to rest in an official ceremony at Al Alia Cemetery, where martyrs of the Revolution for Independence are buried.
President Bouteflika is one of the statesmen that Algeria has known and who provided things to this country. but he was responsible for the political and economic abuses that occurred during his 20 years of rule over the country.
I hope that this event will constitute a new political stage that can open a new era for Algerians that will enable them to achieve real development. The main pillar now is to rely on comprehensive reforms that include all aspects of life. And this is the most important after the previous phase officially ended with the death of President Bouteflika.
Well, China has expressed condolences to Algeria over the death of former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Bouteflika was a prominent politician in Algeria for decades and served as president from 1999 until 2019. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said the former president was an old friend of the Chinese people. Throughout his career, Bouteflika promoted the development of relations with China. Now, Monday marks the second Sustainable Development Goals moment of the Decade of Action. The event serves as a snapshot of progress towards the 17 SDG goals. However, even before the pandemic, Africa was off track to ensuring good health for all by 2030. COVID-19 further exposed weaknesses in healthcare systems and pushed many to near collapse. More on lessons learned and steps for countries to take with CGTN's Adel Al-Mahrawi.
Long queues at public clinics, patients struggling to get admitted into public hospitals. That was the usual in many African countries before the coronavirus. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the continent's healthcare providers witnessed unprecedented demand for their services.
In Africa, because of the limited resources, as we know, so that would put immense pressure, and in some places we could see the health systems there nearly collapsing. And this is what we saw in Tunisia, for example, when the health service there being under huge amount of pressure, many cases of COVID-19, very slow campaign of vaccination as well.
Despite the shock the pandemic caused in African healthcare, parts of the continent appear to have avoided the devastation seen in more developed nations. Experts say it's because developing nations have a strong civil society which assists governments in providing basic public services.
In Africa, because of the limited resources as we know, that would put immense pressure. In some places, health systems are nearly collapsing. This is what we saw in Tunisia, for example. The health service there has been under huge pressure. Many COVID-19 cases, very slow campaigns of vaccination.
In Egypt, pharmacies play an integral role in diagnosing and prescribing medicine to patients, which during the pandemic acted as the first line of defense that helped scores to get treatment at home. The vaccination phase, on the other hand, exposed the African pharmaceutical industry's limited capabilities, leaving the continent relying almost entirely on imported jabs. Africa is unlikely to meet the September global vaccination target set by the World Health Organization.
It's only 3% of the overall population of Africa received their vaccinations in mid-September. And if we compare these figures to the figures in Europe and the USA, we will see a massive gap. In Europe, about 65% of the overall population in the United Kingdom, whereas in Africa, the target by end of September, it's about 10% of the overall population. And there are many challenges stopping that target to happen really in Africa.
At least 12 African countries have reached or crossed that 10% vaccination target for the end of the month.
Africa's largest economies like Egypt, Algeria and Nigeria are not among these nations. The pandemic is a wake-up call for the healthcare services and standards in the continent. But even if the lesson has been learned, most African countries cannot afford to develop. Adel Al-Mahrawi, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's take a closer look at this. We're now joined by Olekhan Oshonkoya, a policy analyst and researcher at Citizen Commons International. He joins us via Zoom from Abuja. Thank you so much for your time, Ola. Now, as countries meet to examine progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, COVID-19 has impacted progress in Africa.
Thank you for having me. There is no doubt that the pandemic has a significant impact on the potential of the world to achieve the goals of the SDG. And as you can see, a big part of the world poverty is in Africa, and then the effect of the COVID pandemic means that more people, more families, more communities have been put further into poverty because they've lost their livelihood. They have not been able to keep their life together because of the effect of the pandemic. There have been companies closing down, institutions not being able to advance their commercial activities because of the pandemic. And I think the United Nations pushed out a report that suggested that over 168 people in Africa alone will be pushed further the line because of their to poverty, extreme poverty actually, because of the impact of the COVID pandemic in 2020 and moving beyond that. So I believe that the potential of the world to achieve these goals of the SDG has been largely and significantly been affected by the pandemic. And the effect of this is being seen every day now. As we can see, people are losing their job, people are losing their livelihood, and then the effort to bring back the lost income, the lost livelihood because of the pandemic, and is very low. And then the rate at which countries are able to adapt to the changes of the effect of the pandemic is also so low. And you can imagine what that says, because before that, we already having countries in Africa that are really struggling to meet these goals already because of low development and then bad governance as well. So I think there is no doubt, and clearly, pandemic has increased the gap and is bringing more people into poverty, and then it's going to make it even much harder and much more difficult to achieve the SDG by 2013 as originally designed.
And having said that, Ola, as you mentioned, Africa was already off track to try and meet these goals in healthcare, education and food security. That 2030 deadline is fast approaching. Is there anything at all that can be done to help Africa achieve these goals and get back on track?
Yes, there's a lot of things that can be done. And then I think one of the very first thing I will say is that it's important to get Africa vaccinated, because the pandemic is still here, it's not gone yet. I mean, we dealt with the initial effort to actually deal with it, but now that we have vaccination, we have to increase the potential of the African population to receive this vaccine. At least that way we know that we are reducing the potential of any other waves or any other comeback of the pandemic in the continent. And then another good thing I know that a few effort has been put in place that making sure that there is increased number of vaccination being made available by other countries. And then what we just have to do a whole lot more in educating the communities to actually take these vaccines when they become available. To make sure that the vaccines are available is one thing, to actually make sure that the communities and the myths surrounding the vaccine are removed, and then people are encouraged and are actually taking the vaccine. The other thing that can be done in terms of the effect of poverty and reducing poverty, removing particularly when it comes to the SDG 1, 2, and 8, which is one of the most affected because of the pandemic, is to how do we use technology to actually increase the potential to create employment, to improve livelihood. And I think it means the government, there has to be increased partnership to actually increase the opportunity to use technology in education, in healthcare, to be able to allow countries to take the potential, because if there is anything that the pandemic had made clear to us, that nobody is safe until all of us are safe. So until all of us are able so we use technology, the digitalization of Africa. How do we invest in infrastructure to make sure that children that are going to school are able to do so without actually, when they are not doing so at home? Can they use technology to be able to have increased access to education materials, in healthcare as well? How do we make this investment? And of course, more importantly, the economic and social conditions of countries. Right. What kind of partnership is it within the countries? And I think one of the best example with the AFTA, for example, it needs to be used as an instrument of development to increase commercialization, to make manufacturing, to make industrialization easy in Africa, so that we can have jobs, and so that we can also have improved livelihood. And I think African leaders need to do a whole lot more to work with partnership with development partners, with other countries and within Africa and outside of Africa to actually make sure that our contributions, there's a targeted effort to make sure that the infrastructure investment, the governance systems are put in place to make sure, and also to ensure that there is social protection. Because again, if you think about what happened with the pandemic, it shows that when there is no social protection for the people, when things go wrong, it goes bad.
Indeed.
So we have to also start to think about policies that can be enhanced to make sure there's social protection for people so that when things go wrong, you have some sort of support from government that is institutionalized that you can access, that can help you keep your life going, keep your life going, and then of course in healthcare, so that you can also begin to have access to these essential services that will make it easier to respond to this kind of pandemic and also other effects that helps the achievement of the SDG possible in all these areas.
Thank you so much, Olekhan Oshonkoya, joining us via Zoom from Abuja. You are watching Africa Live, your business news up next. Uganda enacts its first ever climate-related law to deal with the climate crisis. And the Royal Dutch Shell company to start producing low-carbon jet fuel at scale by 2025.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time, it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Uganda has taken steps towards dealing with the climate crisis with its first ever climate-related law. The government hopes the new national climate change law will help the country adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change. CGTN's Leon Senyange reports.
It's a first for Uganda, a law on climate change. It will enable the implementation of better climate change response measures and also provide for a coordinated national approach. The government says the law will help Uganda to pursue its voluntary mitigation targets under the Paris Agreement and United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
In our local context, we must make our laws, depending on our level of capabilities and also level of socio-economic development. And that's what we did. So we believe that this bill will help Uganda really to address climate change.
Some provisions in the law also require relevant ministries to integrate climate change education in the national curriculum. Uganda has previously struggled with the implementation and enforcement of climate-related policies due to lack of a legal framework. Now, with an existing legislation, environmental campaigners say the country is in a good place in dealing with climate change. With its variable weather, Uganda is susceptible to both flooding and drought. These remain a major threat to the country's national development goals.
The effects of climate change, of course, are widely spread. There's a whole spectrum, depending on where somebody is coming from. There are effects on an individual level, there are effects on an institutional level, there are effects on community level, there are effects as a country at large.
But adapting to the damage caused by climate change is likely to be a financial burden on developing countries like Uganda. Currently, the bulk of the required climate finance is provided by developed countries.
The West is equally challenged by the COVID pandemic. So we are saying private sector should open doors
to civil society actors so that they support some of our activities that are supporting government policy in the area of climate change.
Uganda's ambition in dealing with climate change could pay off sooner. The country has already committed to reducing its emissions by 22% by 2030. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Oil trader Royal Dutch Shell plans to start producing low-carbon jet fuel at scale by 2025. It's part of attempts to encourage the world's airlines to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The company says it aims to produce 2 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, in sector lingo by 2025. It will be a tenfold increase from today's total global output. SAF is produced from waste cooking oil, plants and animal fats and could cut up to 80% of aviation emissions, according to Shell. Aviation accounts for 3% of the world's carbon emissions and is considered one of the toughest sectors to tackle due to a lack of alternative technologies to jet-fueled engines. SAF accounts for less than 0.1% of today's global aviation fuel demand, primarily because it costs up to 8 times higher than regular jet fuel. Nigeria's central bank has announced it's working with Bit Inc. as a technical partner in a bid to launch its own digital currency this October. The Apex Bank expects the e-Naira to accelerate financial inclusion in Africa's biggest economy. It also expects the digital currency to enable cheaper and faster remittance inflows, as CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports.
For a long time, Nigeria's central bank was averse to cryptocurrency trading. Much so, it directed all financial institutions to close accounts operating in crypto exchanges. But the Apex banks made a complete reversal, recruiting Barbados fintech company Bit Incorporated as its technical partner. Bit's role would be to help Nigeria mint and distribute its digital currency, the e-Naira.
What makes us excited about what is called the digital currency or the cryptocurrency is the aspect of this currency to appreciate in value. If the demand for this e-Naira is also so demanding, is on the increase, I believe that it is something that not just Nigerians, it could also serve as a cross-border payment all over the world. Gradually, it could be a currency that a lot of other countries will also be interested, those that do business with Nigeria.
Bit Incorporated was selected from over 100 eligible bidders. Among other reasons, the fintech firm was chosen for its technological competence, efficiency, and platform security. The e-Naira is scheduled to launch on October the 1st, which is the country's 61st independence anniversary. But industry players question the central bank's decision to engage a foreign company for its local digital currency.
We have consultant companies in the crypto and blockchain space who can offer this kind of service to the Nigerian government. The CBN knows, they know that we have these capable hands, but we can't figure out what happened, why they chose to contract this out to a foreign organization.
According to leading Bitcoin marketplace Paxful in 2020, Nigeria is the second world's Bitcoin market after the US. The e-Naira is capable of accelerating financial inclusion and cross-border trade. It would also provide faster remittance inflows and cheaper transaction rates.
Cryptocurrency have the advantages of going up and going down. For example, I kept my 10,000 Naira. It has the ability to increase more to 20, 15, even 50,000. But in a situation whereby I have 10,000 today and tomorrow I need to use it, or next week I go back and I see $2,500, $2,000, 2,000 Naira, sorry. But those are the disadvantages.
The government has yet to release the project blueprints for the e-Naira, but the central bank says it will be regulated.
I would recommend the government deploy a decentralized network and of course come up with a regulatory framework for the crypto space and of course the blockchain technology space.
The e-Naira would be supplied by the Apex Bank to licensed financial institutions for onward supply to individuals. Upon its launch, the CBN will provide an interim e-wallet for customers. Experts are hopeful that the West African nation will harness financial technology and the many opportunities in blockchain technology. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
In Egypt, mergers and acquisitions increased fourfold in the first half of 2021. The North African country saw deals worth $4 billion this year compared to $906 million over the same period last year. Egypt was also the highest target of M&As in the Middle East from foreign investors. From Cairo, Yasser Hakim reports.
It's been an active 2021. With mergers and acquisitions in the first half of the year exceeding the whole of 2020 in the North African country. Experts say this reflects the global economic optimism towards emerging markets like Egypt.
Egypt is in a very big economical reform, and now everything is turning to be attractive. When we see Egypt from a business perspective, we see a very big population, exceeding 100 million person, very rich in the resources, and competition is manageable, and cost of operation is still manageable and still efficient compared to operating cost for businesses across the world.
There were 111 transactions worth $4 billion, up from 906 million a year earlier. The health sector saw significant activity, such as the Cleopatra Hospital Group, acquiring several hospitals and medical centers. The financial sector followed, with Emirates' First Abu Dhabi Bank and Bahrain's ABC Bank buying out Lebanon's Audi and Bloom Bank's entire operations in Egypt. And there was also a boom in another sector.
Civil ride-hailing companies the best example of a new sector growing in acquisitions. We saw foreign companies buying other foreign companies based in Egypt, like Uber buying Careem, while Souk Egypt was lately acquired by Amazon. So the traditional heavy industries and sectors are not the only target, but there is growth in the app and online trading companies. It's happening in many countries worldwide, with tech companies and high-tech startups leading the M&S, and it's the same in Egypt.
Local transactions were 59 to 52 cross-border, while foreign investments in inbound M&As has increased by over 50% year-on-year.
Definitely, we have a clear example of the investment from the United Arab Emirates in the real estate sector. And now it is maybe the biggest company that injected cash. I think it reached like 12.5 billion US dollars. Another sectors is the health sector is still very attractive. The tourism is very attractive. There's many sectors now that is raising flags for foreign investors to come and invest in Egypt.
Experts believe the economic recovery from the effects of the coronavirus pandemic will lead to even more mergers and acquisitions in 2022. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Like many cities across Africa, Ghana's capital, Accra, is changing rapidly. High-rise buildings and ultra-modern structures are springing up all over the city. But authorities are finding it hard to enforce laws against pollution, especially in unplanned settlements that have popped up due to the city's fast-growing population. CGTN's Nabil Ahmad Rufai takes us for a walk around Accra.
Accra is the most densely populated city in Ghana, with a population of more than 4 million people. Many of them came here from other parts of the country in search of better job opportunities. The population explosion has made it difficult for authorities to keep the city clean. There are not enough waste bins along the streets, meaning there is litter in many parts of the city. According to the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, the city generates more than 3,000 metric tons of waste daily, but only about 2/3 of that is collected. The city's gutters are often clogged with plastic waste and other trash. The local government has launched several campaigns to urge residents to stop polluting and recycle, but that haven't gained much traction. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo also pledged to make Accra the cleanest city in Africa by 2020, but it still lags behind other cities on the continent. The government, however, says it is considering ways of managing the city's waste better, including recycling, but hasn't released a detailed plan yet. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, our new series on women making a difference. We look at how a Nigerian woman is playing a pivotal role in childhood cancer interventions.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Women across Africa have continued to play pivotal roles as change agents. In Nigeria, childhood cancer is one area that is yet to receive much needed attention. But one woman is changing the narrative by engaging government and communities with childhood cancer interventions. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam tells us her story.
39-year-old Kemi Adekoye leading a walk against childhood cancer in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. It's the fifth of its kind. The mother of three is pushing conversations and interventions around cancer in children. She lost her brother to the ailment in 2017. That incident sparked deep compassion in her to raise support specifically for kids who face similar ordeals.
What we do, if there's a child that has a need for financial support, the hospital communicates with us directly and we try to help as much as possible. But even at that, we still have the personal relationships. We still do birthday parties for children. We still do children's day parties, Christmas parties, and all of that. We've helped some parents get jobs.
So far, Kemi has come through for more than 60 pediatric cancer patients. 10-year-old Shitu Adewumi is one of the beneficiaries. He's all clear after being treated for leukemia at age 6. He now looks forward to a brighter future.
I am happy I am cancer-free now. I want to be a doctor in the future, so help other children.
She broke the news to me that my son is having cancer of the blood. I said, cancer? Where is it from? Nobody has this in my family. Cancer of the blood. I fainted immediately. They are trying to gather some money. That is when the Okapis, they came into our life. She gave me a hug, she greeted me, and she greets the child too, and she gave us an envelope.
The World Health Organization, WHO, estimates that 400,000 children are diagnosed with cancer yearly. Those in low-income countries like Nigeria are 4 times more likely to die of the disease compared to high-income countries. Awareness and intervention for childhood cancer here is low, and case management has been difficult. Treatment facilities and funding are inadequate.
Presently, there hasn't been much support from government. In fact, even the NHIS that initially had provision for free laboratory basic tests lately withdrew their services. In the last 4 years, our support for children with cancer has been great. She had brought hope to many families caring for children with cancer.
Despite the emotional burden of losing some of the children, limited finances, and low government interventions, Kemi continues to count her wins with every child that survives. Her goal is to push until she garners the much-needed support for children battling the deadly disease. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
To the Democratic Republic of Congo now, where a group of artists have created elaborate costumes made from trash and other discarded materials to highlight the numerous problems that people living in the capital, Kinshasa, face. Correspondent Chris Ochomringa caught up with the group and filed this report.
Bubbling with creativity, Congolese artists display outfits made from rubbish collected from different parts of the DRC's capital, Kinshasa. From plastics to broken mirrors and electric cables, they have all been turned into costumes. And in typical Kinshasa style, the artists hit the streets to flaunt their costumes. But it's not just for show.
I designed this costume to awaken the conscience of our leaders to the problem of power blackouts in Kinshasa. We have had many cases of women being sexually abused by men because of a lack of electricity.
Other artists chose to highlight the dangers of poor waste disposal and the injustices committed by Belgian officials during the colonial period.
I designed this costume to raise awareness about the suffering that our great-grandfathers experienced when they were forced to collect rubber by Belgian colonialists. I'm also highlighting pollution in factories and the automobile industry.
This sculpture represents our ancestors, and the message they have for all of us is that we should recycle the rubbish on our streets and transform it into products that will have some importance in our lives.
Eddie Ekete is an artist who founded this festival known as Keen Art. He's been organizing workshops to introduce young people to different art forms. This year, his mission was to advocate for a cleaner city.
Our environment in Kinshasa is very dirty, so we decided to organize this art festival to educate the public about the hazards of poor waste disposal. We want to have a clean city in the future. That's why we have taken our unique artworks to the streets.
These young Congolese artists are looking forward to a brighter future, but their country's dark past, characterized by conflicts and political instability, is still a stumbling block to their careers.
These artists have found a subtle way of drawing the world's attention to the problems plaguing the Democratic Republic of Congo through their creative costumes. Their advocacy for a cleaner city and the provision of better social services has attracted many people to their workplace in Kinshasa's Molokai village, an area renowned for producing great artists and musicians. Chris Ochomringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
And coming up in your